Hello, thrill seekers and mystery lovers. Are you brave enough to explore the dark side of Mother's Day? As flowers bloom and cards are exchanged, not all celebrations end with smiles. Tonight, we delve into the most chilling tales where Mother's Day holds a sinister twist. From eerie gifts that curse their recipients to ghostly apparitions of long-lost matriarchs, each story will leave you questioning the shadows and whispers in your own home. These aren't your typical Mother's Day stories, they are gateways to the paranormal, where the maternal spirit takes on a haunting new meaning. Prepare for a series of bone-chilling narratives that will make you think twice about what lurks behind the festive facade of Mother's Day. Will you make it through to the end without glancing over your shoulder?
Welcome to my home.
In the quaint, seemingly peaceful town of Elmridge, a heavy mist always lingered slightly above the ground, especially as night fell. It was in this town that Sarah had grown up, a place where everyone knew everyone, and where every old house had a story or two to whisper when the winds blew cold. Sarah had moved away years ago, but this Mother's Day, she decided to return to her childhood home, a gift in mind, something deeply personal and quite unusual. Her mother had passed away a decade ago, under mysterious circumstances that the town still whispered about. Some said it was an illness, others suggested something more sinister, tied to the old legends of Elmridge. Whatever the case, Sarah had found something in her mother's attic last time she visited, an antique mirror, ornate and seemingly ordinary, yet it held a secret. As a child, Sarah's mother used to say, "This mirror shows more than your reflection. It shows your heart, your soul." She claimed it had been in the family for generations, and that on certain nights, under the right moon, you could see not just your reflection, but glimpses of those who had passed on, their eyes meeting yours, full of emotions and unsaid words. Sarah planned to clean the mirror and give it a place of honor in her own home, as a tribute to her mother on this special day. Yet, as she wiped the dusty glass, she felt the air chill, the room dimming as if shadows were leaning in close to watch. In the gleaming surface, her own eyes met another pair, eyes that were unmistakably her mother's, filled with a mix of love and an urgent warning. With her heart pounding in her chest, Sarah leaned closer to the mirror, her breath fogging the glass for a moment before she wiped it away with a trembling hand. The eyes that met hers were filled with an intense sadness and a pleading urgency that she couldn't ignore. Sarah's gaze was fixed, her body rooted to the spot as the room around her seemed to fade away, leaving only the cold, silver glow of the mirror's surface. As she continued to stare, the reflection began to shift. The background of her old room dissolved into a different scene, one that was starkly familiar yet eerily altered. It was the very same house, but years ago, viewed from a perspective she had never seen with her own eyes. She was seeing through her mother's eyes. The scene played out like a silent movie, showing her mother, younger and visibly distressed, hiding an object underneath a floorboard in Sarah's childhood bedroom. The vision was so clear, so vivid, that Sarah could almost feel the panic her mother had felt, the desperation to protect whatever was hidden there. When the vision faded, and she was back in her own time, the silence of the house seemed to press in on her ears. Sarah, now driven by a need to understand, hurried to her old bedroom. The floorboards creaked familiarly under her steps as she entered. The room was mostly empty, save for a few boxes of old belongings that she hadn't had the heart to sort through. Kneeling down, she pried up the floorboard just as she had seen in the mirror. Inside, covered in years of dust, was a small, leather-bound book. It was her mother's journal, filled with writings that Sarah had never known existed. Compelled by an irresistible pull, Sarah decided to read the journal right there in the dusty silence of her old bedroom. She sat cross-legged on the floor, the musty smell of old paper and memories filling the air as she carefully opened the worn leather cover. The pages were yellowed with age, the ink faded but still legible. Her mother's neat handwriting marched across the pages, revealing secrets that had been buried just as deeply as this journal. The entries started innocuously, talking about daily life in Elmridge, but as Sarah flipped through the pages, the tone shifted. Her mother wrote increasingly about strange occurrences, whispers at night, objects moving on their own, and a persistent feeling of being watched. The entries became more frantic, filled with fears of a presence in the house, something that her mother believed was tied to the very mirror Sarah had intended to restore as a Mother's Day tribute. One entry, dated just a few weeks before her mother's untimely death, stood out starkly. It read, "I fear I have invited something into our home." It came through the mirror, a gateway I did not understand until it was too late. This entity seeks something from us, something I cannot give. I must find a way to close the gateway, for Sarah's sake. A chill ran down Sarah's spine as she read these words. The mirror, her intended gift, was not just a conduit of sentimental reflections, but a gateway for something much darker. Her mother had tried to protect her, to close this gateway, but had she succeeded? Suddenly, the room felt colder, the shadows in the corners deepening. Sarah could feel the weight of unseen eyes upon her, the air thick with anticipation. She knew then that she had to find out how to close the gateway her mother had spoken of. Determined to solve the mystery and protect herself, Sarah turned back to the journal, hoping to find any clues her mother might have left about closing the gateway. As she flipped through the pages, her eyes scanning the increasingly desperate entries, she found a section that looked like a blend of a diary entry and a hastily scribbled set of instructions. It read, "I have consulted old Mrs. Leary, the last of the town's acknowledged wise women. She told me that the gateway opened through the mirror can only be closed by one who shares blood with the opener. A ritual of sealing, she called it, involving elements that represent the earth, air, fire, and water, bound by a personal sacrifice of something cherished." Sarah's eyes widened as she absorbed the implications. She needed to perform a ritual, and not just any ritual, but one that required a personal sacrifice. The thought was daunting, but the urgency in her mother's words pushed her fear to the back of her mind. Gathering her resolve, Sarah decided to find these elements. 1. Earth, a handful of soil from the garden where she and her mother used to plant flowers together. 2. Air, a feather from the old elm tree outside, where wind chimes sang with every breeze. 3. Fire, a candle from the living room, always lit by her mother during stormy nights to ward off the dark. 4. Water, water from the backyard well, believed to be as old as Elmridge itself. For the personal sacrifice, Sarah thought hard about what she cherished most. It was the photograph she carried in her locket, a picture of her and her mother laughing under the summer sun, a memory of happier times. Armed with these items, Sarah prepared to perform the ritual at midnight, the time when the veil between worlds was thinnest, according to Mrs. Leary's notes scribbled in the margins of the journal. Under the cloak of midnight, the house seemed to breathe with a life of its own, each creak and whisper magnifying the gravity of what Sarah was about to undertake. She gathered the items in the center of the room, under the watchful gaze of the antique mirror. The candle flickered as she placed it down, casting erratic shadows against the walls. Sarah began by sprinkling the soil in a circle around the candle, symbolizing the earth. She then laid the feather next to the flame, representing air. With a trembling hand, she poured the well water into a small bowl, setting it beside the candle for water. Finally, she lit the candle with a match, the fire casting a warm, protective light. Taking a deep breath, Sarah removed the locket from around her neck, opening it to reveal the photograph inside. With a heavy heart, she kissed the photo before placing it in the center of the circle, her personal sacrifice. As the elements were set, Sarah began to recite the words her mother had written, words meant to bind and close the gateway. Elements of the world, hear my plea, bound by blood, I call to thee. Earth below and air above, flame that cleanses, water that loves. Take this token from my heart, seal the breach, let none impart. By this right, I claim what's mine, close the path, let no line be drawn, bind the gate, I seal this with a sign. As she spoke, the air grew heavy, the candle flame danced wildly, and the mirror's surface seemed to ripple like water. Sarah's voice grew stronger, more confident with each line, until she finally shouted the last words. The room fell silent, the candle extinguished as if snuffed by an invisible hand. Sarah waited, her breath caught in her throat, until the mirror's surface stilled. It was just a mirror once more, reflecting only the room and its lone occupant. The oppressive feeling lifted, the shadows retreating to their mundane corners. Exhausted but relieved, Sarah felt a profound sense of peace settle over her. She had done it. She had closed the gateway and protected herself, and possibly others, from the unknown horrors that had once lurked on the other side. As dawn's first light crept through the curtains, Sarah placed the mirror back in its original spot, now just a simple heirloom. The locket, with its photo a bit singed but still intact, was once again around her neck, a reminder of the love and strength passed down through her family.
In the small, windswept town of Elder Hollow, Mother's Day was marked not just by celebration, but by an eerie tradition that traced back generations. Each year, as families gathered to honor their matriarchs with flowers and gifts, a single, mysterious Mother's Day card would appear on the doorstep of one chosen household. The card was always beautifully crafted, yet no one saw who delivered it, and it bore no sender's name, only a cryptic, handwritten message inside. This year, the card appeared at the doorstep of the recently widowed Mrs. Evelyn Morrow. The town whispered about the bad omen it might bring, as the last few recipients had met strange and untimely fates not long after receiving the card. On the front, the card was adorned with a vintage illustration of a weeping willow beside a quiet, moonlit pond. Inside, the message read, "To the last mother of Elder Hollow, may your final days be as serene as the still waters." Evelyn, a skeptic of superstitions and a stout-hearted woman, took the card with a grain of salt. She displayed it on her mantelpiece, more curious than fearful about its origins. Little did she know, the pond depicted on the card mirrored the one at the edge of her property, a place rumored to be haunted by the spirits of those who had vanished without a trace decades ago. As the days shortened and the night breezes grew colder, strange occurrences began to unfold around Evelyn's home. Whispers echoed through the halls, and shadows flitted just beyond the corners of her eyes. The townsfolk began to avoid her, crossing the street when they saw her approach, their eyes darting nervously towards her home. As the days after Mother's Day slipped by, the atmosphere around Evelyn Morrow's home thickened with a palpable tension. The whispers that once merely echoed now seemed to carry messages, calling her name in hushed, urgent tones whenever she was alone. The shadows that flitted in the corners of her vision began to linger longer, taking on more defined shapes, as if something, or someone, was waiting just out of sight. One evening, as a storm gathered overhead, casting an early twilight over Elder Hollow, the air inside Evelyn's house turned frigid. The lights flickered and dimmed as if straining against an unseen pressure. Evelyn, feeling a mix of defiance and dread, stood in her living room, staring at the card on the mantelpiece. The weeping willow on the card seemed to sway, its branches moving subtly, unnaturally, as though stirred by an otherworldly wind. Deciding that she could no longer ignore the haunting occurrences, Evelyn wrapped herself in her coat and walked out to the pond at the edge of her property. The wind whipped around her, carrying the scent of rain and something faintly metallic. Thunder rumbled in the distance, but it was the soft, almost imperceptible sound of water lapping against the pond's edge that drew her closer. As she approached, the surface of the water remained eerily still, reflecting the stormy sky above like a dark mirror. Suddenly, the reflection shifted, showing not her own face, but the visage of a woman she didn't recognize, pale, with sorrowful eyes that seemed to stare right into Evelyn's soul. The ghostly figure whispered, "Free us," her voice barely audible over the storm. Heart-pounding, Evelyn stepped back, her mind racing. The legends of Elder Hollow spoke of a group of mothers who had drowned in this very pond during a Mother's Day picnic gone tragically wrong decades ago. Their spirits, it was said, had never left, bound to the water that claimed their lives. Now, it seemed they had chosen her to break their curse. Determined to help the trapped spirits, Evelyn steeled her resolve under the heavy, oppressive air of the approaching storm. She remembered old tales her grandmother used to whisper about the town's history, stories of rituals and offerings meant to appease restless spirits. Armed with this lore, she decided she would conduct a ritual to release the mother's souls from their watery grave. First, Evelyn needed items that would symbolize life and passage: white candles to represent light in the darkness, a locket containing a picture of her own family for connection, and a bundle of lavender for purity and peace. Gathering these items in a small, trembling basket, she returned to the pond as the first raindrops began to splatter against the ground, darkening the soil. Arranging the items carefully by the water's edge, Evelyn lit the candles and placed them in a semicircle. The wind toyed with the flames, but did not extinguish them. She opened the locket, allowing the faces of her loved ones to watch over the ritual, and scattered the lavender into the water, its floral scent mingling with the earthy aroma of rain. With her heart pounding in her chest, Evelyn spoke into the storm, her voice clear and resolute. "Spirits of the mothers, hear me. I offer these gifts to guide you home. May the light free you from darkness, and the love of family lead you to peace. You are remembered, and you are released." As she spoke the final words, a profound silence descended, the wind and rain pausing as if listening. The surface of the pond rippled, and the reflection of the mysterious woman appeared once more, this time smiling softly. Around her, faint outlines of other women surfaced, nodding gratefully towards Evelyn. Then, as quickly as they had appeared, the images vanished, and the pond's surface returned to its calm stillness. The candles flickered one last time before going out, leaving Evelyn in the quiet night. She felt a weight lift from the air, a sense of completion and relief that flowed through the woods and washed over her. Evelyn stood up, her clothes damp and her body chilled, but her spirit alight with a warm glow. She had faced the unknown, helped those who were lost, and perhaps found a new purpose in the legacy of Elder Hollow's mysteries. As she walked back to her house, the card that had started it all lay forgotten on the mantelpiece, its cryptic message now a resolved whisper in the history of the town, energized by her encounter at the pond and the successful release of the spirits. Evelyn found herself drawn deeper into the rich tapestry of Elder Hollow's supernatural lore. The experience had peeled back a veil that she hadn't realized was there, exposing a world brimming with mysteries that begged to be explored and understood.
In the small, seemingly tranquil town of Eldridge Hollow, the local flower shop, Bouquet of Thorns, was famous for its exquisite and unusually vibrant flowers. Owned by the enigmatic Mrs. Wren, a widow whose husband had mysteriously vanished years ago, the shop was particularly busy around Mother's Day, an occasion that seemed to stir a somber energy within its walls. This year, a chilling rumor began to circulate just days before Mother's Day. The flowers from Bouquet of Thorns were said to have peculiar effects on their recipients. People whispered of loved ones who received these flowers acting strangely, harboring dark secrets, or vanishing without a trace soon after. Despite these unsettling stories, the shop's business flourished, driven by a morbid curiosity and the undeniable beauty of its bouquets. As Mother's Day approached, a young man named Julian decided to buy a bouquet for his mother. He dismissed the rumors as nothing more than small-town superstitions. Stepping into the shop, he was immediately struck by the intoxicating scent of roses mixed with something else he couldn't quite identify, a sharp, almost metallic smell. Mrs. Wren greeted him with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Looking for something special for your mother?" she asked, her voice soft yet somehow chilling. Julian nodded, his gaze drawn to a striking arrangement featuring deep red roses encircled by a ring of black thorns. "That one," he said, pointing to the bouquet. Mrs. Wren's smile widened. "An excellent choice," she replied, her hands carefully wrapping the stems. "Just be careful with the thorns. They are sharper than they look, and there's an old saying around here, every thorn has its tail." As Julian left the shop, the bouquet in hand, he felt a sudden, inexplicable dread. What was the story behind these thorns? And why did Mrs. Wren look so pleased as he walked away? Julian decided to brush aside the uneasy nibbling at the edges of his mind. Convincing himself that the rumors were mere fabrications, he drove to his mother's quaint Victorian house at the edge of town. The structure, with its peeling paint and overgrown garden, seemed to watch him with a somber, foreboding gaze as he approached. He presented the bouquet to his mother, who received it with a mixture of delight and surprise. "Oh, Julian, they're beautiful." But aren't these from the Bouquet of Thorns? I've heard strange things about that place, she said, a hint of concern lacing her voice. It's just superstition, Mom, Julian reassured her, though the memory of Mrs. Wren's unsettling smile lingered in his mind. Besides, they're just flowers. What harm could they possibly do? His mother placed the bouquet in a vase on the window sill, the deep red of the roses casting a stark contrast against the pale curtains. As the days passed, Julian noticed subtle changes in his mother. Initially, it was just forgetfulness, then came the murmurs in the middle of the night, conversations with unseen presences. She became particularly attached to the bouquet, often staring at it for hours, whispering to it as if it held answers only she could understand. One evening, Julian arrived to find the house eerily quiet. The bouquet, now wilted, seemed to exude a darker aura, the thorns sharper and more menacing than before. He called out for his mother but received no response. A sense of dread settled over him as he ascended the staircase, each step creaking under the weight of his growing fear. He found her in her bedroom, staring out the window, her back to him. The room was cold, unnaturally so. "Mom," he ventured, his voice barely a whisper. She turned slowly, her eyes hollow, her expression haunted. "They told me secrets, Julian," she murmured, her voice a ghostly echo of her former self. "The roses, they whisper of things no living soul should hear." Chilled to the bone, Julian realized the grim truth. The rumors were not just stories. Something ancient and malevolent lurked within the flowers, something that fed on the souls of those who dared to keep them. Determined to confront the malevolent force that had ensnared his mother, Julian resolved to act before it was too late. He decided to return to the source of all the troubles, the Bouquet of Thorns flower shop. Under the cloak of a foggy evening, he made his way back to the shop, his resolve hardening with every step. The shop was closed, but a faint light glowed through the frosted windows, casting eerie shadows. Using the spare key hidden under a flower pot, a secret he knew from his childhood days when he used to help Mrs. Wren as a boy, Julian slipped inside. The familiar scent of roses hit him first, now intertwined with something darker, something he could almost taste in the air, a metallic tang mixed with damp earth. As he moved stealthily towards the back room where Mrs. Wren prepared her bouquets, he heard her chanting in a low, guttural tone. The words were not any language he recognized. They seemed to twist the air around them, making the room feel colder, the shadows darker. Julian peeked around the corner and saw Mrs. Wren standing over a large, ancient-looking book opened on a pedestal, surrounded by various unsettling artifacts. Mrs. Wren was so engrossed in her incantations that she didn't notice Julian. He took a moment to observe the artifacts, a mix of dried herbs, bones, and stones forming a circle around her. At the center lay a single, blackened rose, its petals seeming to absorb light rather than reflect it. Gathering his courage, Julian stepped forward, breaking the circle of artifacts with his foot. Mrs. Wren stopped her chanting abruptly, turning sharply to face him. Her eyes, once a soft gray, now glowed with an unnatural light. "Why have you come here, Julian?" she hissed, her voice no longer the gentle lilt he remembered. "To stop you," Julian replied firmly, though his heart raced. "Whatever you're doing, it's hurting people. It's hurting my mother." Mrs. Wren's expression shifted, a flicker of sadness passing over her features before being quickly replaced by anger. "You do not understand. This is bigger than you or your mother. I am binding things that should not be set free." Julian felt the temperature drop further, the shadows in the corners of the room deepening. "I don't believe that you're doing this for any good reason. What are you binding? Why involve innocent people?" "Every spell has a cost," Mrs. Wren whispered, her gaze intense. "And sometimes, the cost is a human soul." Refusing to be intimidated, Julian took a step closer. "Then I'll break this curse myself." Reaching out, he grabbed the blackened rose, feeling an immediate chill seep into his bones. He snapped the stem, and as he did, a scream filled the air, a wail of agony and relief mixed together. Mrs. Wren collapsed to the floor, the glow fading from her eyes. The shop began to shake, books and vases falling from shelves. Julian ran from the building, clutching the broken rose. Behind him, the shop seemed to groan and then grew silent. Returning to his mother's home, Julian found her asleep, looking more peaceful than he had seen her in days. When she woke, she remembered nothing of the past week's events. Relieved, Julian vowed to watch over her, knowing deep down that the darkness was perhaps only temporarily at bay. Was this the end of the horrors, or had Julian only scratched the surface of something far deeper and more ancient? Only time would tell, but for now, he had saved his mother, and that was all that mattered.
In the quaint village of Ashgrove, nestled between Whispering Woods and the languid loop of the Willowmere River, stood the ancient estate known as Matriarchal Echoes. A fitting name, for the mansion was handed down through generations of women, each leaving her mark in the annals of its eerie history. It was Mother's Day when Lydia, a direct descendant of the original matriarch, received the keys to the mansion following the mysterious disappearance of her Aunt Marianne. Lydia had only seen the mansion in faded photographs and heard of it in hushed tones at family gatherings. The house was said to possess a life of its own, walls that whispered secrets of the past, and hallways that echoed with the laughter and cries of long-gone residents. As she approached the towering iron gates on that overcast morning, a chill ran down her spine, not from the cool breeze, but from a sense of foreboding that seemed to seep from the very soil on which the mansion stood. The gates creaked open as if welcoming her home, or perhaps warning her to turn away. Lydia, driven by a blend of curiosity and duty, stepped onto the property, her footsteps muffled by the thick moss that carpeted the path. The mansion loomed before her, its windows like dark, watchful eyes and the ivy-clad facade holding onto secrets of a bygone era. As Lydia inserted the key into the front door, a sudden gust of wind stirred the leaves around her, whispering words that sounded suspiciously like a warning. She pushed the door open, the hinges groaning under the weight of years, and stepped into the grand foyer. The air inside was stale, heavy with the scent of old wood and lavender, a favorite of the women who had ruled this home. In the dim light, Lydia could make out portraits lining the walls, the faces of her ancestors, all women of strong will and peculiar fates. Their eyes seemed to follow her as she moved, silent guardians of their domain. The house, as if recognizing her lineage, seemed to breathe a sigh, the floorboards creaking softly under her feet. Lydia's first night in Matriarchal Echoes would prove to be unforgettable. She planned to explore the attic, where it was rumored that the original matriarch had practiced strange rituals and where Aunt Marianne was last seen. As night fell over Matriarchal Echoes, shadows deepened into dark corners, and the house seemed to settle with an eerie quietude. Lydia, with a lantern in her hand, approached the narrow staircase leading to the attic. The wood underfoot groaned with each step, as if protesting the disturbance after so many years of silence. Reaching the top of the staircase, Lydia hesitated. The door to the attic was slightly ajar, swinging gently as if moved by an unseen hand. The air was thick with dust and the musty scent of decayed books and old linens. She pushed the door open fully, the lantern casting long, dancing shadows against the walls filled with relics of the past. The attic was cramped and cluttered with trunks, old furniture covered in white sheets, and stacks of yellowed letters and photographs. Lydia's heart pounded in her chest, not just from the climb, but from the palpable sense of history that enveloped her. She moved deeper into the room, her eyes scanning the piles of family heirlooms, each piece whispering stories of joy, sorrow, and secrets kept. In the far corner of the attic, Lydia noticed an ornate wooden chest with intricate carvings, vines, moons, and stars that seemed to glow faintly in the lantern light. It was out of place among the simpler belongings, clearly much older and carefully crafted. A shiver ran through her as she approached it, her fingers trembling slightly as she reached out to lift the heavy lid. Inside, the chest was lined with faded velvet, and atop the velvet lay a collection of ancient books, their covers worn and pages brittle. Among the books was a small, leather-bound journal, its latch rusted but closed. Lydia, driven by a mixture of fear and intrigue, picked up the journal. The moment her fingers touched it, the air in the attic shifted, growing colder, as if the opening of the chest had released something long confined. Lydia opened the journal to the first page, where in elegant, flowing script was written the name Eleanor, her great-great-grandmother, known in family lore as a woman of uncanny powers and the original matriarch of matriarchal echoes. The entries were cryptic, filled with talk of visions, whispers from the woods, and rituals meant to protect her lineage. As Lydia read, a soft creaking sound came from behind her. She turned sharply, lantern casting wild shadows, but saw nothing but the swaying of a curtain in a draft she could not feel. The house seemed to breathe around her, the walls whispering in a language she almost understood. As Lydia delved deeper into Eleanor's journal, absorbed in the cryptic revelations of her ancestor, a soft thumping noise suddenly punctuated the silence, drawing her attention away. She paused, her breath held, listening intently. The sound repeated, a rhythmic tapping coming from the far end of the attic, behind a pile of old furniture shrouded in dusty sheets. Setting the journal down cautiously, Lydia picked up her lantern and edged toward the source of the noise. The air felt cooler as she approached, and a faint, inexplicable scent of roses filled her nostrils, a fragrance strongly associated with her great-grandmother Lillian, who had perished under mysterious circumstances within these very walls. Pushing aside the heavy drapes of cobwebs, Lydia found an ancient armoire, its dark wood carved with floral motifs that seemed to writhe under the flickering lantern light. The thumping sound was louder now, more urgent, as if something, or someone, was trying to communicate from within. With a mixture of dread and resolve, Lydia reached out and pulled open the armoire's doors. Inside, instead of clothing or forgotten treasures, she found an old mirror, its surface dusty but intact. The frame was ornate, adorned with roses and thorns, eerily similar to the carvings on the chest containing Eleanor's journal. Lydia wiped the mirror with her sleeve, revealing a clear, unblemished surface. As she peered into it, the reflection at first showed only her own anxious face, pale in the lantern light. But then, the glass seemed to flicker, and another image superimposed itself over hers, a woman in a long, flowing gown, her expression sorrowful and her eyes imploring. It was Lillian, Lydia's great-grandmother, recognized from the many portraits in the mansion. Lillian's lips moved silently in the mirror, and although no sound came through, Lydia felt the words in her heart, protect the legacy, beware the echoes. The mirror then clouded over, and the image vanished as suddenly as it had appeared, leaving Lydia staring at her own reflection, now alone. Shaken, she stepped back, the implications of her vision swirling in her mind. The mansion, it seemed, was alive with the spirits of her ancestors, each tied to this place, each with their own warnings and wisdom to impart. Lydia stood in the dimly lit attic, her mind racing as she tried to process the haunting vision of her great-grandmother Lillian in the mirror. The eerie encounter left her with a deep sense of responsibility, a pull towards something greater than just inheriting an old mansion. The whispered warning, protect the legacy, beware the echoes, resonated within her, echoing through the chambers of her heart. Deciding that understanding the past was the key to protecting her future, Lydia resolved to delve deeper into the history of matriarchal echoes and its matriarchs. She returned to the chest to retrieve Eleanor's journal, now seeing it not just as a family relic, but as a crucial guidepost. Lydia spent the rest of the night reading by lantern light, piecing together the fragmented stories and strange entries that spoke of hidden rooms, forgotten rituals, and protective wards meant to shield the family from something sinister lurking beyond the estate's tranquil facade. In the following days, Lydia explored every corner of the mansion, guided by hints and clues from the journal. Her explorations revealed secret compartments and walls, old charms hidden beneath floorboards, and a small, secluded garden that her ancestors had tended with care, filled with herbs known for their protective properties. As she immersed herself in the family traditions and secrets, Lydia felt a growing connection to her lineage. She began to practice the rituals detailed in the journal, finding comfort in the old ways that seemed to strengthen the house's serenity and her own resolve. The climax of her journey came on the next full moon when Lydia performed a ritual intended to renew the protections laid by Eleanor. Under the silver light, with the house casting long shadows around her, Lydia recited ancient words and scattered herbs around the mansion's perimeter. As she did, the air thrummed with energy, and she felt the presence of her ancestors around her, their whispers now clear and encouraging. Feeling empowered and protected, Lydia took up permanent residence at Matriarchal Echoes, turning it into a haven that honored her ancestors while welcoming the future. She decided to document her experiences and discoveries, adding her own chapter to Eleanor's journal for future generations. Matriarchal Echoes stood strong, a testament to the strength of the women who had shaped its destiny. Lydia knew that whatever challenges might come, the house and its legacy were safeguarded, with her as its current guardian, ready to face the echoes of the past with courage and a newfound understanding of her family's mysterious and powerful heritage.
Thank you for joining us on this eerie journey through the darker side of Mother's Day. If tonight's tales have left you glancing nervously over your shoulder, or if the whisper of a ghostly Happy Mother's Day echoes in your ears, then our mission here is accomplished. Did these stories send a shiver down your spine? Which one haunted you the most? Let us know in the comments below. We love hearing which tales truly terrify our fearless viewers.